Okay, we're live now. We are live. Hello and welcome, everyone. We're thrilled to have you joining us on this special occasion. This is an insightful panel discussion webinar celebrating Black History Month. We aim to discuss the robust export and import opportunity calling for Africans in the diaspora and even African at home. We're bringing awareness to these vast opportunities in and within Africa for our African on the continent and our African who are in the diaspora, to African American, to Blacks, and to Caribbean communities. My name is Benga Motayo, and I'm the Executive Director at the U.S. Africa Trade and Business Network. And with me, I have a fantastic panel of entrepreneurs and experts who are not just dreaming about Africa's economic future, but they are actively shaping it. Today, we're here to shed light on the bountiful ventures awaiting the Africans, the African American, Blacks and Caribbeans, and people of African descent, about Africa's economic future, but those who are actively working in it. So, in today's panel, we will start by exploring the current landscape of trade and investment in Africa. From there, we would move into the challenges and opportunities our diaspora faces. We would share a success story from an African in the diaspora who is already doing this. And then we will take all of your questions. We will do we will do all our very best to take as many of your questions as possible. And then we're going to wrap this up by mapping out actionable steps for our listeners who can take to be part of this exciting economic movement. I encourage you to write down your questions, share them in the room so that everybody can see and we can do all our very best to respond to them. And so, without wasting much of your time, I'm going to start by asking our panelists here to please introduce themselves. Our panelists are going to introduce themselves. And I'm going to start by asking our panelists to maybe let me start with Mr. Fritz. Mr. Fritz, please go ahead and introduce yourself to the audience. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Benga, and thanks for the opportunity to participate in this event, which I think is very timely, very important. I'm the managing partner of McClam & Kunda & Company, which is a New York-based international trade and business development consulting firm. I'm also the managing director of the NMBC Global, which is the international arm of the National Minority Business Council, a 51-year-old membership not-for-profit business organization. We provide advocacy, education and training and business opportunities to the ethnic minority business community and small businesses. Currently, most of my activities have been focused in Africa and the Caribbean. Currently, I'm involved in the agricultural sector primarily in Africa and some community development in the Caribbean. So I'm looking forward to sharing some knowledge with you guys and prepare to move forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Fritz. I'd like to go over to Shalom Bako to please introduce himself.
Hi, good morning, good day to everyone. Shalom Bako. I am the co-founder of Afrivana, We're a agro manufacturing and distribution company, started in Nigeria and currently across multiple countries in both the U.S., or let me say across America and the African continent. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Bako. Can I please ask Busi to please introduce himself? Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Good morning, good day. Thanks for joining us. Thank you, Benga, for hosting us. My name is Busi Matsiko. I'm a consultant, advisor, global speaker. I'm a founder. I founded one of the first fashion technology companies, which was twice acquired. I sit on the board of Berkeley College, which is a business college in New York and New Jersey, which is 94 years old. And I also convened the Africa Future Summit. And I'm about being a bridge between Africa and its diaspora and scaling businesses industry agnostic. I'm looking forward to this conversation because I'm about showing the excellence and being ensuring that we have intentional and deliberate partnerships and collaborations, and we do not operate in silos.
Thank you, Busi. Well said. So, to our audience, when we talk about Africa, we often speak of a land rich with resources and potentials, from Nigeria's bustling tech hubs to Kenya's renewable energy revolution, to the African Continental Free Trade Agreement of 1.3 billion people. It's clear that the continent is ripe for a business boom. And when you look at being the youngest population, most of the world resources are from Africa. So if there's no gainsaying that fact that Africa and the continent of Africa is ripe for a business boom. So, and it's not just about money, it's about reconnecting with our roots, contributing to sustainable development, and creating a legacy of prosperity for generations to come. It's a powerful moment for all of us with African heritage. And so on this month, when we celebrate Black History Month, there is no better time for us as a people to begin to look at how we can harness our resources in a way that we can have a lasting impact on the continent, on the Black race. And we're zeroing in on trade and investment, export and import, because this is something that we already have as a people that we can leverage on. And so to kickstart things off, I'd like to turn to my first panelist, Mr. Freight. Can you paint us a picture of the current business climate in Africa and how it's evolving? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Venka. And to do that, this is Black History Month. So I'd be remiss if I did not take the opportunity to reflect a little bit on history, our history as African people. And I'll go back to Malcolm X, who, in looking at our consciousness and our history, said we need to look back to see where we're coming from, to understand where we are, which is what you're asking us to look at today. Where is Africa today? And where will we be in the future? Let me just throw out a few quick historical facts to put our presence today in perspective. And I go back to the Queen of Sheba, one of the earliest trading activities that I can think of was her trip from Ethiopia to Jerusalem to visit Solomon, and what she took. She took the best of Ethiopia, which were spices, trade, gold. And granted, the rest is history. Menelik was the outcome of her trip to Jerusalem, but she was very involved in trade, fashion, and trade. I also reflect on Mansa Musa, the Mali emperor, who in I think he was emperor from 1312 to 1337. But on one of his trips to Mecca, he took into Egypt enough gold to disrupt the global financial structure at the time. And he has been considered the world's richest man, whether it's in currency of that era or of today. The Aksum Empire, which is in Ethiopia, was one of the largest and best trading regions back in 150 BC. And going forward, I would like to look at the era I call the Industrial Revolution, which I shouldn't say created, but it was during the Industrial Revolution that Africans became a commodity and we became slaves to the industrial development of Europe. The Bretton Woods, and go back in the 1940s, the Bretton Woods Conference created a financial institution globally that has affected us in terms of trade since 1940s into today. We see what the World Bank and the IMF as institutions have done. But we should also, at this point, in looking at what Africa is about, pay attention to one of the strongest, in my view, for us as Africans, financial institutions, the Afrexim Bank out of Cairo, Egypt, that recently has engaged the Caribbean in a very meaningful way. Today, what we've seen is a power shift globally, and Africa happens to be at the center of this. Whether it's what's happening in the Red Sea or what's happening in the Congo, we need to look at the influence that Africa is exerting in international trade and international business. Let's look at currency. We have digital currency influenced by Africa. Mobile currency is dominant in Africa, and the digital economy that is being talked about cannot be discussed to a large extent without Africa's engagement or the realization of the role that Africa will be playing. We look at the political changes taking place in Africa, where European countries are now affected by decisions made by young Africans. I'm speaking specifically to the political decisions being made in Francophone Africa and the impact, the economic impact that is having in Europe, and we can refer to France to understand what I'm talking about. Looking at what is happening in the Congo in terms of natural resources. These are things we need to look at as Africans in the diaspora and understand the importance of the historical importance of we in the diaspora and the role we can play in Africa's economic liberation. And I call what we're doing today an offshoot event, essentially, of the political liberation that Africa went through in the 60s. With the help of the diaspora, we can't overlook Cuba's role in Africa's liberation, political liberation. And now we're seeing Africa's role in Caribbean survival when we look at an African institution like the Afrexim Bank aggressively pursuing the Caribbean for investment and trade. So let me consider that my little introduction to where we are now as Africans. I'll get back to many more details as we proceed, Benga. But I'd like to throw that out as my historical reference. to where we are as Africans today. So back to you, Mr. Benga.
Thank you so much, Mr. Freight, for taking us through this journey. You know, if you don't know where you're coming from, it's difficult to know where you're going. So some people might think this is a boring historical fact, but it's very important what you have just said. And it's important for us as a people to know all of this information. Now, I'd like to ask another panelist, Bussy, uh, can you add a little bit more to this question on the business climate in Africa and how things are evolving? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Benga. And to your point, it's important that we know the history of Africa to remind ourselves of who we are as a people. And I'm glad that Mr. Fritz brought that historical aspect, because it reminded me of, I was a history major up to my A levels, and I did African history as well as European history. And we always looked at it from, even its African history, from an African perspective and a European perspective, and how do we put this together. So it's important to have balance in these conversations. And it just reminds me of a conversation I had at Forbes Black event in November, when I said, until a lion begins to tell its story, you'll glorify the story of a hunter. Why do I say this? Mainstream media historically has painted Africa, Afrocentric stuff as, they would focus on negative aspects. And those negative aspects are what the world viewed Africa as. And you've heard of some of those narratives, even in schools, where kids would be called, they would say African booty scratchers, that type of language. But we have seen, especially post-COVID, the leapfrogging of Africa with regards to technology. And these platforms have made people lean in to understand what the continent is about, what value it brings, and what partnerships and collaborations could come out of the continent when we are fair and when we work together and not judging and putting Africans as or Afro diaspora as people at the who are always begging for handouts. But you have seen, this has shown that the business people are entrepreneurial, and we have a young base, and there's big business, there's big opportunities. That's why you've seen an influx of people moving to the continent to live on the continent, as well as trading fairly with the continent. There's still a lot to be done, but let's celebrate the small wins, and let's look at all this from a win-win perspective. And I'm glad that you mentioned Afrexim Bank. Like, it's important to see that, Afrexim Bank has also created a creative, has said focusing on the creative aspect of Africa, which is a large base. Because when we think of Africa, we think about when you think about it, we have music, we have, and we're seeing that through Afrobeats and Amapiano, and we have designers, we have art. But we see also in the continent, we have also been so focused on the big five or big four careers, or big five careers, that is law, medicine, engineering, architecture, among engineering, and neglecting the aspects where we can generate income from as well, and how do we add value to those areas where we have competitive advantage to export it or even consume it. And so I think thankfully, we have platforms such as these where we are having these conversations, and more people are becoming aware of the opportunities and are also beginning to see how can we be, even the Western world seeing how can we, the mainstream people in the Western world are seeing, oh, you mean that these opportunities, Africa is not all about crime, it's not all about
Mm.
disease. So that's an area that I believe that,
Let's
you know
say
what, the climate is ripe.
thank you so much. Now, I do not want to lose that train of thought of what you just mentioned. I want to really piggyback on that. You spoke about opportunity, and that's a good place for me to ask Shalom Bako. Can you share your insight into the current export and import opportunities available to those in the diaspora? Like Busi has just mentioned, what are some of these opportunities for those here can leverage on? Thank you.
Thank you, Benga. Well, I speak often over the last number of years. I started in exports and imports back in 2010, and being born and raised in Nigeria since back then, long before, now there's a lot more interest for and demand and need for exports and imports um, within the continent and outside the continent. But in terms of opportunities, I believe in almost every industry there is an opportunity, not just in terms of products, but in terms of services as well. So, you know, I, she mentioned earlier music, and that's an aspect that we've seen huge growth in. But I do believe in every industry currently there is an opportunity, whether it be products or services, for exports and imports. Oftentimes, and even reading through the chat, I think right now there's a huge push and perhaps even a fad, if you would, to focus on agriculture. There is a huge demand and huge opportunities in agriculture as well. However, there are also opportunities in minerals, there are opportunities in services. We've seen that with the tech industry when you look at developers, etc. You have multinational corporations all across Europe and America who do their hiring now on the continent to get developers. So that's in terms of services. In terms of products, I mean, we have a wide range of products. I think sometimes our problems are that we limit ourselves to just what is hot. So we might hear, oh, hibiscus is hot this year. That's the hot keyword. And so everybody rushes for that. I think what we need to do more is research and development. So doing more research around the resources we have on the continent. That way, there is more diversity in the portfolio of products or services that we can export or import. So it's more about research. And to anyone in the diaspora, I often say, take what you're already doing and find a way to use that. So if you're in the medical space, if you're in the art space, whatever it is, do what you do and you can find that space and the opportunities on the continent and outside the continent. But that's what I would encourage to anyone in the diaspora is use your already existing knowledge. Oftentimes we spend too much time trying to get into a new space. You've been a doctor all your life, but now you want to get into agriculture. And that's often too much of there's a huge barrier to entry and a huge learning curve that you're going to have to experience if you're going to do that. So I would say, look at what you're already doing and look for the opportunities in that space.
Oh, thank you so very much, Bako, for sharing that awesome nugget. Now, I'd like to ask another panelist, Akindele, what are your thoughts regarding these export and import opportunities that the diaspora can leverage on?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me on this panel.
Akindele,
Yes.
we did introduce ourselves before you joined, so I'd
Oh,
like you to do an introduction of yourself.
oh,
So
sure.
that,
Absolutely. Akindele Akinyemi. I'm the president of the board of directors for the Global African Business Association based here in the state of Michigan. We're a business support, business education, and economic development agency that focus on linking the wealth between the African continent as well as local cities here in the United States. My background is in education. I've been an educator for over 25 years in both K-12 and higher education. We started this journey 10 years ago in the city called Inkster, Michigan, which is right outside Detroit. To answer your question about the advantages of imports and exports, um, just to get straight to the point, we have been for 10 years leveraging this conversation and strategy to rebuild cities, um, helping people understand the importance of economic development through import and exports. Most of the cities, and I'll just tell you some personal examples to the audience here. Here in the state of Michigan, um, there are 10 million people. 18 cities in Michigan are considered local urban communities, including Detroit. What's interesting is that most of those cities don't have a relationship with the continent of Africa as it pertains to trade. Right here in the city of Detroit, Detroit is a city of 630,000 residents. Um, we have a port. We have a port authority that oversees the port of Detroit. I was in a meeting with one of the main terminals yesterday that conducts imports and exports around the world, but they really don't do anything with Africa, which I find that to be interesting because the company's been around for over 100 years. When I explained to the leadership of that company on the port of Detroit about the advantages of importing raw materials from Africa and exporting from Michigan to Africa, they became very interested. What I'm learning in this journey, especially when we talk about import exports, is we haven't had a conversation to create economic impact. The port of Detroit alone here creates 16,000 jobs and $1.3 billion in economic activity. But most of that economic activity is from other regions and not the continent of Africa. We have things to offer here. Automotive industry is very strong here, of course, advanced manufacturing and agriculture. These are things that the continent can benefit from export-import network here in a place like the state of Michigan. The St. Lawrence Seaway, for example, that connects the Atlantic Ocean to the Detroit River and the Great Lakes is very vital, but is underutilized as it pertains to the blue economy. When you're looking at other assets in this area, like Will Run Airport is one of the largest cargo airports in the United States. We handle over 200 million pounds of cargo a year. But when it comes to Africa, import and export through air cargo, that's almost non-existent. And so what I'm saying all that to say that we have a very strategic and unique position here to really expand export and imports, whether it's agricultural products, whether you're exporting raw materials here to Michigan, whether companies in Africa, whether it's Nigeria or Ghana or Sierra Leone or Kenya, want to establish a business or a manufacturing plant here in Michigan and creating a two-way trade of investment, utilizing AGOA and the whole nine yards for economic impact, job creation, and rebuilding a tax base. That is what we are trying. That is what we have been trying to do, and will continue to do. Africa should never be left out of the conversation anywhere in the United States, especially in local communities. When it comes to export and imports, we offer the world everything, and so it's time for us to really step up and step in and dig in about exports and imports as it pertains to job creation and our local economy here. Thank you.
Thank you, Akindele. I just want to add to this conversation. In our organization, we have a program called Export and Prosper. And the background of this is this way. Um, if you want to sell, say, value-added products on Amazon, for example, if you're outside of the U.S., it takes you a lot of effort to get those products into Amazon. If you do fulfillment by Amazon, for example, if you have customer service issues, if you need to replace a product, if you need to answer your phone call, if you need to put your product in warehouse, and all of these things, it's a little bit difficult if you're outside of the US. But for an African in the diaspora, you can actually do all of these things without stress. Many of you, you have single store owners, independent store owners who can make decisions whether to take product from you or not. And so you in the US, in the diaspora, you have a lot of opportunity. Right now, I see people every day, they go to Ghana, they go to Nigeria, they buy shea butter, they buy black soap, um, they bring them into the US and they add value to them and they're selling them. So these are some of the opportunities that abound. You know, since COVID-19, we're all aware that everybody is moving towards healthy products and product that have health benefit like the sherbet, the moringa, you know, and the ginger and all of these products. So those in the diaspora have this opportunity. That's another opportunity we can leverage on when we talk about bringing product into the US, adding value to them and selling them. You can buy a product for $1 and sell it for $10 in the US. And the person you're buying product from at $1 is still making, you're not ripping them off. They're still making profit because ordinarily if they were to sell that product in their local market, they probably would sell it for 10 cents or 20 cents. So either way, it's a win-win opportunity. So I just wanted to bring that up as well to our audience for you to be aware. So I want to thank all of you that has contributed so far. We're going to move along, but before we do that, I like to have this teaser on the screen to our audience. So since we're celebrating Black History Month, so my question is, which president officially recognized Black History Month in the United States? I've told one of our team member to keep an eye out in the chat room. Whoever get this question first is going to get a prize from our organization. So which of the president officially recognized Black History Month in the United States? So that's the question. And remember, if you have other questions, put them in the chat room and we will do all we can to answer all of your questions. So let's move along. We're doing very well with time. I'd like to go to our third question. And with this, we like to start with, so we've had, so I'd like to start with Busi at this point. Busi, I'd like to ask you, what are some of the industries Yeah, so what are some of the industries you believe are untapped that our listeners should be paying close attention to? And how do you see the diaspora uniquely positioned to tap into this opportunity? So the question is, what are some
I
of the
don't know
industries?
whether we would say that they are untapped, but as our colleague, our brother here said, also identifying what you're strong at, because not because to avoid that fad mentality. Because I read somewhere where what is success? Success is what's doing what you're passionate about and what you're good at, because that will push you forward, right? So that said, you could look at areas you're strong at, but somehow fall into other categories. Let me give an example. AI. Right now, there's the whole call for AI. Many Africans are nervous about it because what is AI? I mean, and sometimes there are cultural implications. Someone is Muslim or Christian, and they're like, this is a serious situation. But we can't ignore that it's around. So maybe one could look into it and see how it could work for them. Maybe in agriculture, maybe in education, maybe in healthcare, because even your cell phone has AI. And what is AI? It's someone has to program it into some data. I mean, they depend on data to um, input the information into whatever you're doing, including our phones. Through our phones, they're able to tell our consumption. But there are many industries. Some people go into agriculture, others go into manufacturing, others go into mining, others go in the service industries, even cleaning of airports, things like that. And as I said, the creative space. But I think the key area that sometimes we look that the challenge is the funding and the resources, access to data, access to information, and also the governmental regulations. And I think when we begin to strengthen our ecosystems, we'll be able to find who's good at what and then bridge the gap in whatever areas one chooses to go into.
Thank you, Bussy. I appreciate that feedback. I'd like to ask Mr. Fritz, would you like to add some thought to this question? Bussy has spoken about AI, which is the one that when we talk about export and import, it's not something I think about, but she said it so well. AI has permeated every part of our life, and this is a technology that cannot be overlooked. If we want to stay relevant, AI is the place to be looking at. AI can drive trade, it can drive investment, it can drive connectivity. You're looking for buyer or you're looking for seller. AI can do a good job to connect you by using this algorithm, whatever you feed it in. If you know exactly what I'm looking for in the quantity and quality that I'm looking for and where I'm looking for it, then you can meet my need right where I am. So thank you, Bussy, for bringing AI into this conversation. I'd like to ask Mr. Fritz,
Yes, sir.
do
Thank
you
you,
have a thought on this?
Benga. You touched a very sensitive part for me. I often say that artificial intelligence should never replace our natural intelligence. And I say
Hmm.
that specifically about Africa because Africa controls vast natural resources across this world. And if we don't protect them, the environment, we can get excited about technology. And we have been victims of technological advancement going back to the Industrial Revolution. Today, we have an opportunity to shift that. And we need to be mindful of that. You talk about import, export. My first business was management consulting, and we were focused on import and export. As a matter of fact, the firm had named, parts of it development, import, export, DIMPEX, because we were committed to that back in the 60s. And if we're going to make a difference in Africa, you are in an excellent position because what you're doing, you're dealing with a large number of Africans, and we need to focus on, when I say Africans, and speaking of diaspora Africans and continental Africans, the numbers of individuals are very important. It's how we mobilize them. We're not strong in financial resources. Our strength is in relationship capital. And that's what we have to stress. What are the entry level ventures that we should be looking at? We talk about agriculture. I'm working in the agricultural sector. And we have to look at where do we enter the value chain? Are we going to be manufacturers, traders, packagers, we speak about value added? But we can't look at value addition without focusing on industrialization. Because between value addition and industrialization is where jobs are going to be created and wealth is going to be gained for the multitude of Africans who are coming through your organization. And I think what we need to spend a lot of time doing is educating our entrepreneurs going into Africa how to succeed in import and export. Do you know the African financial sector? How does that work? How does international trade finance work? These things are important. We have the quality assurance. Your organization, and I know Karen is doing this, working with Africans, quality assurance. We speak of agriculture, but when the product, and you speak of ginger, if the ginger gets here with a feather in it, because the chicken went to where the ginger was being dried, and this is fact, it happens. We're drying ginger out in the yard, chickens are running around, and somehow a feather gets stuck in some of the ginger. It gets here, and you're rejected. So we need to understand quality assurance on the African side. The opportunities are there.
Can I say something at some point regarding the conversation?
Yeah, I just want to say that, yeah, artificial intelligence is important. Technology is important. It's how do we use it to solve these little nitty-gritty problems that inhibits our ability to enter into the large markets over here. Whether we're selling product to the retailer on Church Avenue in Brooklyn, or we're selling cocoa to Hershey's or Mars, and I know there's one gentleman in the audience right now who is looking to do that. We must be able to master every aspect of it and have control of it. And yes, use artificial intelligence to do that.
Yes, I want
Thank
to
you.
just say this. Yes, Mr. Fritz, I like that. And I like the fact that you said that, oh, we cannot ignore it, because I'm not, one of the things is just educating people on it, on how we can apply it to just the basic things. Because when I think about myself, I studied on the continent too, and did part of my university in the continent. So I'm not, and I still work closely with it. And so while I'm seeing certain elements whereby we have leapfrogged the world in terms of technology, including fintech, countries, companies such as MasterCard and Visa are now looking to these fintechs to see how how they can borrow some of that information to apply to other areas such as South America. But the key thing is also, I think that's where also our intellectual, how do we protect our intellectual property? That is a key area, and those. So I think a lot of these things we have to do concurrently. We can't leave one thing and go with the other, because there will be an imbalance. So while we're dealing with some of the rudimentary things, we can't ignore the acceleration of some of these technologies. But because we have people who are very smart, who are very brilliant, they can bring us up to speed in this. Because if you think about it, have you heard of the scholarships that even China is giving to East African students to go and study in China on AI and that kind of thing? But what is being done with this research and all that stuff? I'm just talking about every country, every research institution. That's what we've heard of, many Africans doing research and development. But when they submit papers, who takes the credit for those papers? So how can we bring that back in a way that it benefits the people who are involved in this and protect these inventors and innovators?
Let me just add to that. You see, we must take what I call relevant technology.
Absolutely, I agree with you.
I use the term relevant technology because I went from the United States into the developing country with my head full of appropriate technology. When I got there and got on the ground, I learned, and it's what we bring from here, learn on the ground to take our resources and take it to the global market. Whether we're doing cashew or there's someone here, I think, involved in hibiscus sabiri for the sorrel, or bissap as you call it. We must be able to control from from the ground all the way to the packaging, and use the technology to do it, but use our natural intelligence and our resources to grow our agricultural sector. And I say agricultural sector because I'm passionate about that. We go to the food sector and we go to the pharmaceuticals. One of the most successful ventures coming out of Africa in agriculture is in shea butter. The Liberian guys who went on the streets of New York City with a product, they started selling Nubian soap, Nubian this, Nubian that, and now he's a millionaire. We talk about this Liberian millionaire, but he worked. He's another African in fashion. He started and he spent 7 years in the streets of Harlem, peddling African, and we've seen them doing it. But how do we go from there to being a millionaire? It means that organizations like Benga's organization will provide those little details, take parts of AI, little bits of it in conferences and little pieces, and share it with the young Africans, young, brilliant young Africans doing phenomenal things in technology. But we must have the responsibility to let them take the technology and apply it to the resources we have. We have an abundance of natural resources, unlimited human resources. Our job is to mobilize that and make it work so the agricultural sector in Africa, with the potential it has, we're meeting the demands of the globe, of the world. So that's where I'm.
Thank you.
Once I start talking about agriculture, I get passionate, man.
Thank you, Mr. Freight. And thank you, Brucey, for that. I like to, so definitely with all of this conversation, it's apparent, it's obvious that you are all right. But one missing link is these type of wholesome conversations cannot be sustainable if they're only had on webinars and meetings like this. There's the need to have a platform, which was one of the problems this organization found out in 2019 before we started this organization. We need to have a platform where people, those who are looking, those who are serious in export and import, looking to source for product or looking to supply, can all come together and we can really understand, because it's obvious that there is no end-to-end solution anywhere like a plug and play, where just like you have a product then you sell. When it comes to export and import, it's not that simple or straightforward. And when you look at the corridor of the US and African trade, especially in export and import, there is no that solution that it's an end to end, and that's why we created this the US Africa trade hub, that we have people, we have professionals to connect and collaborate and succeed. Our system allows us to connect you and match make you based on what your needs are. So we encourage anyone listening here today, if you want to be part of this organization, right now we're opening this platform for free. So you can all go. A lot of you are already on that platform. We encourage you to go to that link and sign up to be a member. We want to have an awesome conversation. We have a university on this platform where we do education. We talk about compliance. Compliance, let me tell you on compliance, just labeling challenge is one of the major reasons why African products are being rejected in the port of entry. Just labeling standard alone, as simple as that is, and it's because of lack of knowledge. So we do educate, we do teach on how you can label, you can brand products, you can get them across, and you can begin to find buyers. So we encourage everyone to be part of this conversation. And many of all of these facilitators today, they're already on that platform. So it's a place for you to learn, to connect, and to grow. So we're going to move along quickly to our last question. And I'm going to be calling on Mr. Akindele to take on this question. Mr. Akindele. So let's get to the nitty gritty now, the nitty gritty of this whole conversation. What are the practical steps for someone listening right now who wants to get involved in US Africa export and import business, what should they be doing right now?
The
Thank
first,
you.
the first thing, thank you. And the first thing they should be doing is identifying the type of industry they want to, or sector they want to tap into. That's important. Whether you're talking about information technology, whether that's artificial intelligence, machine learning, cybersecurity, or cloud computing, just to name a few, you want to identify what sector you want to tap into. If you want to tap into the agricultural sector, what does that look like? Is that from agricultural technology? Are you looking to go into the food industry, or and so forth? So we need to identify what sector we want to tap into. The next thing you have to connect with is what type of financing opportunities that are available. One of the key things that we have done here on our end, here in the state of Michigan, is we have created a network of micro lenders within our network to assist with that. Whether those micro lenders are giving capital up to $50,000 or $75,000, we have that network available for our business owners, and they're looking for African business owners to tap into that wealth in terms of moving their business and products, whether in their grocery stores or in other venues as well. Also, when you're tapping into this type of industry, this $1.3 billion industry, it's also good to have some policymakers and some stakeholders by your side that can even help write policies to create incentives for that type of wealth transfer and wealth tapping into that kind of wealth. I think those things are very important. I always ask the question here: if the world is investing in Africa, how come Africans are not investing in the world? There's no reason why local communities in our states should be struggling financially when we could tap into the African diaspora to invest in local communities, build schools, whether it's raw materials or manufacturing or housing development or agriculture, technology, or so forth. And so what we need to understand is to start viewing things differently in our mindset. We have to generate economic prosperity within our local communities. I stress local communities a lot as opposed to federal governments or anything, because cities are the catalyst of change in the 21st century, especially on the platform of the fourth industrial revolution. Cities are the catalyst of change. So whether you get into mobility, the automotive industry, or the blue economy, which is very, very red hot, or agriculture, business, and technology, these are the things that we have to pay close attention to. I always remind our policymakers, and I'll be reminding them again at 5 o'clock at this reception I'll be at with the Michigan Legislative Black Caucus. I always remind them that Michigan exports to sub-Saharan Africa about $580 million. It imports almost $1 billion in imports, and preferably from South Africa. And so what I'm going with all this is that tapping into this $1.3 billion industry of goods, wealth, and resources is necessary, not just for the individual, but for the community as a whole. I think we have a voice at the table when it comes to African business, when it comes to technology, human capital, and the whole 9 yards. But we have to tell our story better to our stakeholders, so that we too can share the wealth and spread the wealth here in the 21st century. Thank you.
Thank you, Akindele, for that. I appreciate that. You said it well, and you said it right. I'm going to ask Mr. Bako to also add to your point as to what are practical steps. And just to apologize to the audience, the theme of this conversation may be unclear to some people. The 1.3 billion that we're referring to is not the market size. We're talking about the people. So when you talk about the market size itself, it's way more than 1.3 billion. But when you look at doing business with 1.3 billion people through the instrument of African Continental Free Trade Agreement, you realize that there's so many vast opportunity here. that needs to be leveraged on. So I'm going to ask Bako to please jump in and add his own thought.
Yeah, thank you. So I think, just like he stated, first is identifying what it is that you want to get into. I think that's extremely important because, you know, these conversations are quite hot right now. Everybody is looking at exports, imports. Everybody has their eye on Africa. And I think for anyone on the continent or in the diaspora, first and foremost, it's identifying what it is that you're getting into. The supply chain for export and imports is so large, right? In our organization, we hire everyone from creatives, whether they're photographers or writers or developers. All of them still take part in an export-import industry or trade. So you don't necessarily have to be the exporter yourself, right? There are gaps in places that things need to happen. You could be the driver that drives the goods. You could be the mechanic that fixes the trucks that break down. There's so many areas you can play in. So as we think about the opportunities are not just made in selling the product. The opportunities could be made in harvesting the product, in adding some value into the product, in making the box that the product goes into, right? There's so many different opportunities in it, and that's why the industry is so large and why the market capitalization is so large. 1.3 billion people cannot be selling the same product.
Hmm.
Yeah. So when you think about an industry and an opportunity, look for, the gaps in between, right? There might be someone else who is the front-facing person that deals with the customers. Everybody isn't great at sales. Everybody isn't great at marketing. Everybody isn't great at operations. Everybody isn't great at packaging a product. So you have to identify your own skills. What you are already doing is probably the lowest hanging fruit, like they say. Don't reinvent the wheel. Look at what you're already doing and see where in that industry of exports and imports can I go into. If you've been into administration all your life, or you're currently doing that, we'll look for a company that needs an administrator that is doing exports and imports. You'll learn a lot more about the industry and the opportunities in just sitting in that position. And so identifying those things, just your own skills, identifying that and then finding an opportunity in the export and import industry or with a company that's already doing that, would be your lowest hanging opportunity and fruit. And some other steps in terms of export and import is people don't do their research. And I think that's the biggest thing. I share my journey a lot. I've been doing this since 2010, but I spent 2 years of just research. It wasn't that I grew up in northeastern Nigeria. I know what hibiscus is. I drink Zobo almost every day, but I still spent 2 years of research on who's buying it, how is it coming in, how are they consuming it, all of that before ever taking 1 pound of hibiscus flower to say, let me export it. And so we don't spend a lot of time researching. We look at social media, we look at conversations and webinars and say, look, okay, if shea butter is hot, let me go and find where I can buy some shea butter locally. And then let me try and reach out and see how I can find a buyer over there. When you talk about international trade, there are questions of capacity because the issues we're talking about when people are importing, whether it's at the port, like Mr. Fritz said, finding a feather, we don't pay attention to quality control. But we also have to pay attention to volume. Can you export or can you import the volume that's necessary for a buyer to say this is attractive enough? When you talk about trade, you're talking about air cargo, you're talking about sea freight. These are containers of products moving. It's not, let me send 1 kilo of this and see if it'll sell. You're not going to make profit. These are businesses. And the whole point of being in business is to make money. So if you're only going to send 100 kilos of a product. By the time you calculate your logistics costs, the finances don't make sense. So in order to attract finance, you have to make it a viable business that's going to make money. And when people have money and they want to invest, they're looking to make their money back with interest. So you have to understand what business is, develop a business plan, or identify a role that you can play to spend time to learn those industries. You can't just jump into any industry and expect to be successful at it. Sometimes you need to spend time to whether intern or work within an industry, get the skills, get the information, and then you can move on to start going up the ladder. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Awesome. Awesome.
Mm.
Thank you so much. Listen, thank you, Akindele, and thank you, Bako, for giving us the nitty gritty. These are practical steps that you all need to take if you are serious. And I know you are all serious, but we have to do the work. I particularly like some of the comments. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. If you spend 30 years doing one particular thing, you can apply that in that value chain. There are people who package, there are people who design, there are people who do export control, there are people who do transportation, there are people who do warehousing, the marketing, distribution, even producing and all of that. These are all things that can be implemented within the value chain. You don't have to
Can,
necessarily be the one, you know.
can I interject to
Absolutely.
that? Yeah.
Please
I
go
think
ahead.
I like to also see other areas, like sometimes seizing an opportunity. Opportunities don't always come your way. Being able to see an opportunity when it comes your way. Because sometimes one of our biggest problems or challenges, I'll say challenges, is being perfectionists. You are looking for to master something 100%. And when you're at 40%, you won't jeopardize an opportunity because you're looking to be at 100%. And yet that opportunity comes to you when you're at 40% and you could learn along the way. So we also have to, while we're doing all these researchers and all that, which is great, right? We also have to be able to use that intuition of like, wait a minute, this opportunity might not come around another time. And sometimes people don't just invest in projects, but they also invest in people. Someone might like you and invest in you and is willing to guide you through it. But it's important. I like the element of volunteering and interning and understanding people, because that's also another way of learning.
Thank you, Busi. Thank you so much for adding your voice to that.
May I add something, Benga?
Please go ahead, Mr. Fred.
So Akindele mentioned policy. We need to really pay more attention, and as we do the research that Mr. Kaba mentioned, to look at African policy makers and the policies that impact what we do. I speak of it in the agricultural sector, because the sensitivity of agricultural imports to the cost of living of the average African. If you import rice and the government says tomorrow, I'm going to increase the price of rice so my local producers don't get hurt, that can affect whether you make a profit. If you're exporting rice into Liberia, where there may be a shortage or there's not. But the government policies and those change regularly. So we need to pay close attention to what government policies are. And the second was, the gentleman mentioned doing your research and development on your product, and it took him 2 years. That is important. The little things we miss because we did not get into the details. I learned about sorrel. I took the seeds. I was experimenting, doing my experimentation in the industry. And I put the seeds, after I reaped and cut and dried, in a crocus bag and put it in the room where it was kept. Went back, Rats ate my seeds. Didn't know that I should not put it in there. You learn these things by research, by doing in there and learning that. We have grown four acres, but you learn from doing that. It takes time. Agriculture is an industry where patience is important. And that's a big industry in Africa. When we talk about it, I'm glad you guys are reinforcing where in the supply chain am I going to enter? It's a long chain. Where will I enter? And am I in a strong or weak link?
Thank
So
you so
those
much.
two things are important. And I just want
Thank
to
you so much, Mr. Fritz. This has been awesome. I'd like to apologize. We are supposed to end 8 minutes ago, but everyone would agree with me. This has been an impactful conversation with incredible insights shared by our panelists. So to summarize, the common theme we've had are, consistently innovation, artificial intelligence, identifying industry of interest, get your product ready before you launch out, investing in research, connecting connections, and education. Um, you know, Connection to our roots and our network to continuously educate ourselves on business dynamics with Africa and the United States. So I just want to thank you all for taking time for sharing your knowledge. So I like to take one or two questions. I know some of our panelists have other engagement, so we might not be able to take too many, but I'll try and take as many as possible, and then we will call it a day. So this is a very important question. It's been consistently being asked. So practically, and I'm going to ask Shalom and Akindele because I know you personally, but this is what you do. How can a business in Africa with an export ready product find a buyer in the US? What should they do today to getting someone to buy or source from them? Akindele and Bako, just it doesn't have to be now. You can share your information so that people can follow up with you, but you can just share a quick 1 minute, 30 second. Thank you. And any of our panelists as well.
Yeah, they definitely, the person should reach out to our team at info@gabanetwork.com. I'll put it in the chat again. But just very quickly, in terms of getting a buyer, there's a couple of factors that go into it. Number one, the key thing is always what product are you trying to export for a person to buy? That's number one. Number two, what's your target? What's your target market? Number three, is it export ready? And if so, there's some other logistics that go along with that. And number four, what do you expect? What is your expectation of the buyer in terms of trying to market your product here in the U.S.? And so, I mean, that's just a real quick synopsis. There's more to it. I'll drop an email, the team's email in the chat. Let's have further conversations about that and see what we can do to make magic happen.
Thank you, Akindele. Shalom.
Yeah, like you said, it's probably the most popular question we get when we get contacted for this daily. So for us, you can go to our website, afrivana.com. We do take inquiries from suppliers daily. So on there, you'll find a supplier form. You fill it out, and there's a number of questions that we ask about what the products are, the capacity in terms of volume, and certain numbers of certifications, depending what certifications they currently have, so we understand, the standard of where the product is at. And as you mentioned, there's a lot of factors when we talk about trade, and I think the most important thing I will leave for the audience today is take some training, because there's so much. It's kind of like asking someone who's a doctor, how can I become a doctor overnight? You have to take some training to really understand what it all entails. And so I would encourage you to look out for some training and then understand what it all entails before you start jumping into it. So for us, afrivana.com, we have supplier forms on there, and we have our suppliers go through that process, where we then understand their capability of being export ready.
Thank you, Shalom. I have about 2, 3 people asking that you type that website out. So can you put that website in
It's
just
just the
put it in the chat so I can broadcast it for you.
all right.
All right. So, ladies and gentlemen, because of time, we like to respect everyone's time. It's 12 minutes over. I know you like for us to stay longer, but we would just but if you have further question, we would get answers to them, and we are going to share the recordings with everyone who were part of this meeting today. So before we leave, I'd like to ask each of our panelists to give us their final word. You know, give us your final word before we round this up. Any of you can start. Thank you.
I would like to say it's great that you are here. That's a good, that showing up is always a great step. And seizing opportunities, having audacity to seize these opportunities. And if you don't know how to do something well, always find someone who can do it better. Say, for instance, you're very good at business development, but you're not good at operations. Find someone who complements you, and continue to identify what your strengths are and brush up the areas that you're not so strong at, and also be willing to pivot if something is not working out. That does not mean you've failed. Dust yourself up and stand up again and keep moving and never give up. I'll close with an example. I pushed for I've been observing the fashion industry for a long time. I come from a Wall Street background, and I discovered that we've been having fashion shows without studios for designers in the US, which impacts whether you'll get a buyer or merchandiser come and check out your stuff. And I helped negotiate a deal with Berkeley College, and we've had 2 designers in residence who have been from the African continent. So those are the areas where we can just come together and collaborate and form partnerships to amplify the best out of the continent. I'm so happy for the continent.
Thank you, Busi. Akindele.
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. Few of my parting words is we must prepare for the next 30 years through digital connectivity and using Africa as an economic resource. Pick the nation in Africa, use it as an economic resource to keep local urban communities here in the U.S. sustainable. We can no longer operate our African diaspora from a 20th century perspective. We have to move our communities here into the 4th Industrial Revolution in the 21st century. A sister city between a local urban community in the US and a city in any nation in Africa on skilled trades and skilled tech trades is an evolutionary step in the right direction. And if our business, government, and technology leaders will leverage the continent as an economic resource, our local communities would not be struggling with their tax bases. We will see new businesses, new export-import opportunities, and most importantly, preparing our future for the next 50 years. That is what we have to, that is what we are about, that's what we must be about, and that is the direction we must move in the 21st century if we want to be relevant. Thank you.
Thank you, Akindele. Shalom Bako.
Yes, I would say this has been great. I hope the audience got a lot of information from it. I'll just kind of repeat some of the things I've been saying before. It's really important to do research. It's really important to get ready to do trade. Otherwise, you find yourself in situations where you're not ready, you're not prepared, and then you have some failure. Now, failure is part of the process, and so that's important. But it's extremely important to understand your product, understand the market it's going to, who your audience is. Your audience can't, every product is not for everybody. So it's important to, again, do your research, get some training, and then jump into it. And lastly, it's a long supply chain. There's a space for practically almost everybody, whether you're in the medical space, whether you're in the creative space, there is something, a product or a service that you can identify to get into the opportunities. So find the path of less resistance and get some training.
Thank you so much. And finally, Mr. Fritz.
Thank you, Bengal. Last, what can I say? If we're able to unite behind you as U.S. Africa Trade Hub, I listened today, and not to disrespect others, but the two gentlemen, one providing a service, that's Akindere, that's so critical and so important. If the U.S. Africa Trade Hub can benefit from his infrastructure to build a stronger organization, you're built to the point you can get someone like that from Michigan. And I refer to Michigan because in the 60s, when we had Black economic development, there are a number of industries that came out of the automobile industry in Michigan. That history is there. Those experiences are there. Some of those people are still alive that built those industries. And I'm talking about large industries in the automobile industry. One was Dave Bing, who became a politician as well. That kind of experience that's coming out of Michigan, the things that can be invaluable to the folks in the U.S. Africa Trade Hub. And, excuse me, it's Kaba Baga, the hibiscus king. Your experience could be a model for thousands of Africans in the agricultural sector. I see it every day. I'm working in that sector in an integrated agricultural project. And to have access to that, Benga, in the U.S. Africa Trade Hub, I just ask that we all continue to contribute to it so we can build a hub that really, really speaks to the potential in Africa's industrialization. And I'm saying industrialization because we have to address the policies as well as the little practical things that will make us good entrepreneurs, where we can create jobs and create wealth. So that's my contribution to what we can do. Build the U.S. Africa Trade Hub and commit to it.
Thank you, Mr. Fritz, and thank you to all of our panelists who have made it possible to have this engaging conversation today. We sincerely thank you. And so, on that note, it's been an enlightening discussion. My thanks to our panel for the time and wisdom. And of course, a big thank you to the audience for tuning in and being so interactive. We've had an insightful discussion, and we hope you found the information useful. So do not forget to subscribe to what we do. And the best place for you is to join the Hub for more dialogue. Check out our website for additional resources. And together, let's build bridges and continue to forge a prosperous future together. So I thank you. And if you haven't joined the Hub, I encourage you to go to that link and be part of the Hub. And remember, we do have an annual event in September, the US Africa Business Week. If you like to be part of that event, you can go to US Africa Business Expo to register to be part of this event. For those that have been with us in the past, they know it's always a great time of connectivity. So thank you all. Do have a great day.
Thank you, Mr. Wenger.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Brucey.
Thank you, everyone. It was wonderful.